Welcome back. Well, the country and the world is celebrating Mandela Day and what the man stood for. But with Eskom's continuous power cuts, the country's ailing economy and unemployment at its highest level, how much do South Africans really have to celebrate? To talk more about this, we join up by political science professor Amanda Hoos from Stellenbosch University. Prof, thank you so much for your time this evening. A very good evening to you. You know, it certainly is a significant time in our history where we get to reflect on the life and the legacy and the birth of the late Nelson Mandela. And it's so significant as well that whilst we're speaking about somebody who fought in his own way against an apartheid regime, today we bury an individual who uses words as well as his activism to fight against the same apartheid regime in the form of the late Don Matera. And we just wonder really when it comes to understanding where we are as a country and as we reflect on these 28 years of what was supposed to be freedom, did we achieve that?
Well, I don't think so. I think that, what we've seen in the generation of leaders that were the Mandela generation is that they were either on Robben Island or they were in exile. So they did not have real political power in the sense that they were governing. And what we have now are leaders who are in power and they have been exposed to having power. And we know the old saying that power corrupts. So the political leaders that we have at the moment in a very dire economic situation are just the people who are not concerned with the freedom of their citizens. And with that freedom, I mean not only the freedom of civil liberties like freedom, speech and association and movement that we did not have under apartheid, but also the freedom of having second generation rights of a job, of a house, of healthcare. We don't have that. And it seems if we look at how many people live on social grants at the moment, more than 18 million, means that most people live in poverty. And there's no improvement in their conditions. And the more we have a struggle with Eskom, increasing petrol prices, global economic downturn, it affects the poorest of the poor. And for that very reason, we cannot on this day talk about freedom. I really think that, in the Mandela generation, many of those leaders are dying now. They had a moral compass and they lived by that moral compass. But we see that with state capture and corruption, that moral compass has disappeared. And so what, I think that Mandela would be very disappointed. I think he was actually already disappointed before he died, but it's worse now.
Yeah, as you're speaking about this, Prof, the concern is about the next generation. The next generation of young people who are supposed to be carrying on and passing on the baton of making every day a Mandela Day. But as I also reflected on this day, it was interesting to see how many people actually exercised their 67 minutes of altruism. And it was not the same. Whether we tend to avoid it or admit it, it was not the same this year. And I wonder how sustainable is it for the next generation to continue the baton if we have not imprinted in them the significance of altruism? But how can they be altruistic if they themselves are in a desperate state in this country?
Right, and they are not given the opportunities to show, what they can do and to show their potential. Now, either they even students or young people who've been students and have degrees can't find jobs. So this is very discouraging, and it's dehumanizing for people to keep on looking for work and not finding it. And we, unless we grow the economy, people are not going to find jobs. So I think there are a lot of young people that feel socially excluded. They feel that they struggle to have a vision of the future. And I think that young people also have to have opportunities to show that they can lead and that they can be good leaders, but their role models are really bad. And so I think that also by thinking that our future is only in politics. So we have to. Young people have to strive to become a politician or to work in the civil service to become part of the middle class is a misplaced idea. There are many other ways that people can become part of the middle class. But the model so far, and especially the last 10 or 15 years since Zuma came to power, is to create this impression that if you want to make a good life, you have to be in politics, and you have to be able to access the sources and resources of politics, of government, in ways that are not above board. And I think that's such a bad model to suggest that, you know, this is how one gets into the middle class, not through hard work and making sacrifices and having a moral compass.
Yeah, you know, as you're speaking about that, it is so poignant, the desperation that this country finds itself in. The legacy of Utata Madiba, is it at risk in this country? You know, the legacy of having to forgive those who oppressed you, not forget, but forgive those who were oppressive towards you, be able to build a non-racial, democratic South Africa. Those ideas that he fought for, and those ideas that even during his Rivonia trial was quite aptly communicating that is also ideals that he's willing to die for, are those ideas, sentiments at risk at this stage?
I think so. You know, I think this notion of forgiveness and reconciliation has been replaced by political opportunism. So a lot of what happened in the past is often used to make a point, a political point, and to polarize political or racial groups in South Africa. And I mean, there are politicians that excel at doing this. And we've moved far away from the ideal of non-racialism. You know, I think we are racially very polarized. And like I said, it's used by politicians for their own agendas and to score political points. And this is never what Mandela stood for. I mean, he really was somebody who was prepared to forgive. And if we go back to the first parliament, the first 5 years, we saw that in action. We saw how people came together to build a new democracy. And that was the view to non-racialism, to build strong democratic institutions, and filling people positions with leaders that have competence and integrity. And that's changed completely. So I really think it's at risk. Yes.
Yeah. And Prof, you know, when you're speaking about how political opportunism has kind of marred this legacy of Utata Madiba, I wonder how much economic injustice has marred this ideal of Utata Madiba. Because if you truly are to build a non-racial, democratic South Africa, you can't do so where there is a systemic and indelible economic injustice. So all those ideals that we're speaking about, bringing, you know, uniting the country and having a country of milk and honey and so forth, it cannot take place so long as black people in this country are still not given the economic opportunity to participate. As much as we can say, yes, the fault lies with government as well as policies as well as corruption, but I always question the role that private sector plays in perpetuating the very same reason why we're not in an equal footing. Statistics say we're one of the most unequal countries in the world, and I wonder how much private sector needs to be able to take accountability for the very same inequalities that exist. You can't have people that are earning on one side of the spectrum 300 million and on the other side of the spectrum kids and mothers and families going to bed hungry. It simply cannot be.
No, it can't. And I think that, you know, we are the most unequal country in the world now. And that's the one place where the Truth and Reconciliation Committee fell short, because it did not look at that economic injustice. So there's definitely a role for the private sector to play. But I also think if we look now at the Eskom crisis, the private sector, they say it's prepared to come to the table, but there's so much legislation and red tape and things to work through. So I really think it's time for, you know, also to look at how to make it possible for the private sector to come, you know, to the table and participate in changing economic conditions. And if that, you know, if it needs to be the change in legislation, then so be it. But, you know, if there's a lack of cooperation, unwillingness, then there also have to be some sanctions towards the private sector. But I really think we all, at this point, are under the impression of just how badly we are faring in terms of economic growth, in terms of social inclusion, and people living in very dehumanizing and degrading conditions. That this cannot continue. We cannot build a nation when so many people, that don't have decent places to live. So I really think there needs to be a complete refocus on what should be our priorities in terms of a political agenda. And I think that government is just, they are so busy with fighting the next election, with sorting out the faction fighting and infighting. Now that Jesse Duarte has died, there's going to be contestation around the top six in the ANC. And again, there will be a lot of political fallout around that, and not enough attention to actually what the citizens need and what should be done for the citizens.
We'll have to leave it there. Amanda Gous, thank you very much, Prof, for your time this evening, obviously looking at how do we reflect on this Mandela Day? And is it truly a day to celebrate, or is it a time for deep reflection regarding how are we faring as a country and being able to bring back that ethos of Nelson Mandela? And is it possible when it comes to this dispensation? More importantly, how do we have it when there's so much inequality that exists and economic injustice that continues to be persistent in the country?